Yeah, and according to the International Monetary Fund, global public debt is expected to remain high, surpassing $100 trillion in 2024. As Ini said, about 93% of global GDP. So what should countries struggling with high debt levels right now be doing, especially in Africa? Join us for this conversation. We have Mr. Yitayo Ende, a Chief Operating Officer, KI Limited Financial Advisory and Investment Company, joining me right here in the studio. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm sure you heard our correspondent right there in Washington, and on the front burner is this global debt issue and how the IMF and the World Bank can be fair to every country, at this point. And I know the IMF, they have a mandate of maintaining exchange rates with member countries. But we're seeing, a member country like Nigeria now, we've seen our currency devalued by over 100%, depending on where you're, looking at the devaluation from. So, talk to me about this debt, this forecasted debt level for the global market, and how is this something we should be afraid of at this point?
All right. Thank you, Lady, for having me. I think well projected by the IMF, right? Given that we expect more spending in globally in healthcare, right? In healthcare, in social amenities, in other infrastructure, infrastructure in key sectors of the economy, the IMF has rightly projected, right, that public debts will increase by about 150% of the current position. Now, global GDP, right, is about $110 trillion. Now, so the expectation of IMF, in line with the projection, is that in the next 3 years, thereabout, over the course of 3 years, we should be looking at a public debt, a public debt of about $126 trillion, globally, which, in line with their projection also and their assumptions, I think is pretty in line. Why? Because we should expect, as I said, more funding in healthcare, in social amenities, in critical sectors of the economy. Let's also not forget about the issue of the AI. AI will, require a lot of capital, right? America is already talking about it, about injecting capital into AI, So, those are issues that we bring about incremental public debt of many countries.
But then, if we look at, the global space at this point, let's look at global development.
Okay.
And let's merge that with global debt.
Yes.
Would you say the development we've seen globally, matches the kind of debt we're seeing on the global scene?
Yes, I will say there's still room. There's still room for improvement. I was trying to explain, that why the public debt will also increase in line with the projection of IMF is that, for many countries, the defense spending is also increasing. We understand what is going on, the political instability, the wars that are raging in almost everywhere, in Eastern Europe. We knew what happened with the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia, right? And so many other countries around that corridor, the Eastern European corridor, are, also because of the raging, tension, from Russia, against some of its, the neighbors in that corridor, the likes of Denmark, the likes of Georgia, Poland, and the like. They are, in the process of also increasing their defense spending. As a matter of fact, Poland.
So I guess the world is spending so much in defending itself.
Exactly, defending itself against an aggressor, right. Which, a lot of experts have defined Russia to be. You understand? So we expect that, not also forgetting that, the wars in the Middle East, so you expect, Lebanon, Israel, and even Iran to also increase their defense spending relative to their GDP. The likes of Poland, they are projecting to spend about 4.12% of GDP on defense. We also come down to sub-Saharan Africa, in the Sahel Africa, in the Horn of Africa. We also know what is going on, the war that has been raging between Somalia and Ethiopia. All of these will consummate in increasing the public debt. You understand? And I believe that, it is not for the global powers, For example, look at the biggest economy in the world, America, with an economy of $35 trillion, right? Sorry, with an economy of about $29 trillion, they have a debt portfolio of about $35 trillion. That is about 121%. What that means is that America has borrowed 121% of the economy, but they are managing this debt stock effectively. How do I mean? The appropriation of America that just lapsed last month was $6.72 trillion. That means they spent $6.72 trillion, right? Out of it, 73% of that were revenues that were raked in. Their debt servicing was below 20%, about 16%. America is paying about
that's quite a healthy debt.
Beautiful. They are paying about 1.13 trillion on debt servicing. So they are able to manage it effectively. This is not the same picture that we see in sub-Saharan Africa. For example,
let's bring it down to Nigeria.
Exactly.
At this point, we see our debt stock that hit over 100 trillion naira.
Yes.
In the previous data, and
yes,
definitely we're not spending against. Trying to defend against an aggressor,
yes,
at this time, even though we know there's an insecurity,
yes,
problem.
Yes.
So, what are we really spending on?
The issue with Nigeria, actually, at the moment, our debt to GDP is slightly over 50%, right? What that means is that we have borrowed 50% of our economy. At the moment, we have an economy of $252 billion, right? So, in essence, is that debt too much? No. Relative to our economy, no. But the issue with Nigeria is the revenue generation. We're having pretty difficulty in generating revenue. Now, how do I mean? A communique was just issued by DMO, the Debt Management Office, right, a few days ago, to say that over the course of 6 months, the first half of the year, that debt servicing skyrocketed by 69% to 6.04 trillion naira. And we were only able to rake in 3.7 trillion naira in revenue, right? And Debt Management Office also, from their press release, said that 162% of our revenue was used to service our debt. That is unsustainable. It's a recipe for disaster. What that means is that not only have we completely utilized our revenue to service our debt, we have borrowed 62% of the revenue of 3.73 trillion naira to service our debt. You cannot be using your revenue to service your debt. Mind you, I said for America, in spite of their humongous debt portfolio of $35 trillion, right, their debt servicing is below 20%. It's about 17%, right? But in Nigeria, our debt servicing, from what DMO just released, is that the first half of the year, we have spent 162% of our revenue to service our debt.
But now we see the battle to tame inflation. We see the central bank trying to mop up as much liquidity at this point. We've heard some experts say the major problem is money supply in Nigeria right now. So what do you think is the short-term way forward for this government to say, even though we're trying to tame inflation, we're trying to mop up excess liquidity, we still have to manage our debt at this point? What should be the plan of action at this point?
At the moment, the government has decided to overwhelmingly, right, adopt the liberal capitalist economic ideology of free market economy, where the prices of goods and services, especially the forex market now, relative to the forex market, the price of the currency, Nigerian currency, is determined by an interplay of demand and supply, right? So they've allowed the market to determine the price, right? And that is why we are where we are in terms of the level of devaluation that we have experiencing. We have never seen anything like this before, right? But you see, it's a beautiful initiative, a beautiful economic policy of the government, even though a plethora of experts, economic experts, have argued against it, that a cautious or controlled, free market, economy would have been better, it would have been more economically beneficial to the nation, instead of just, adopting, 100% liberalizing the market. But having said that, the government is doing everything possible to also rein in the inflation. And we must also give kudos, right, to this present administration. One of the key policies, economic policies that this government was able to do, right, was when the Federal Executive Council and the President, Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, right, authorized the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited, to naira sell the crude oil to Dangote and other local refineries. That was a bold move, and it was historic. Why? Because it moves away from what we used to, what the norm, where sales of crude oil were consummated in foreign currency. Because when you do that, you put pressure on the dollar, right? And unfortunately, we are an import-dependent country.
And we need less pressure on the naira.
Exactly.
At this point. Even though we're seeing the government, making moves like selling oil in naira, at the same time, we also need to see other spending too from this same government. Yeah. It should also be in naira as much as possible, and not, we still do a lot of foreign goods, even when you look at some of the procurements, from this government. So we need to see that all round. Absolutely. You see, we no doubt Nigeria we're having a hard time economically, and Nigerians, even though very tolerant, full of grace, are crumbling under the weight of these economic problems in this country. The affordability crisis, the regressive, raging, inflation tax that is biting bitterly, almost everybody in Nigeria, especially the middle income earners and the poor, and those men and women, class have been wiped out. Exactly, those men and women that are living from paycheck to paycheck. Disposable income is at its lowest ebb. Purchasing power has dropped significantly. But you see, again, what I believe the government needs to do, because you see, you rein in inflation in two ways. It's either you mop up excess liquidity or you increase domestic production, right? And that is what I believe the government is trying to do in the petroleum space. By authorizing, NNPC to naira sell crude oil to Dangote, right? So that they can stimulate local production in the petroleum space, right? So that, and some time ago, the vice president was credited to have said that about $25 billion, is being used yearly for petroleum product import, right? And if you also check from the data available, right, from data available, that the Nigerian import bill for 2023 was slightly over $45 billion. What that means is that for only petroleum products alone accounted for about 55% of our total import bill in this country. That is huge. That's concentration risk, right? And we cannot continue to spend so much on just one product line, right? That is what is putting pressure on the economy. And the president has done brilliantly well in this regard, right? To say, no, instead of us to begin to import, let's stimulate local production. Because when you stimulate domestic production, right, you can bring down the cost of goods, right? Just like I said, you rein in inflation either by mopping up excess liquidity or you increase production. And that is what the government is doing right now. Okay. But I hope the initiative will be... I hope it cuts across. Exactly. At this point. Exactly. And we can reduce most of these price pressures. Exactly. But it was so much to unpack there, but it was great having you. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Mr. Itayo, and the Chief Operating Officer, KI Limited, as a financial advisory and investment company. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for having me. All right, we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll head straight to the markets. That's in a moment. Just stay with us.